The air within courtroom 3B hangs thick and still, a heavy, almost palpable presence that presses down upon all who enter. It is a mausoleum of justice, constructed with an almost oppressive grandeur. High above, vaulted ceilings, stained a deep, somber mahogany, curve gracefully, their intricate carvings lost in the permanent twilight cast by the lack of natural light. Only a few strategically placed, recessed LED panels, disguised behind ornate bronze grates, offer a cold, sterile luminescence that does little to dispel the gloom. The scent of aged paper, polished wood, and a faint metallic tang, perhaps from the old brass fixtures, permeates the space, clinging to the heavy velvet drapes that obscure tall, narrow windows, hinting at a world beyond that remains unseen and unheard. Every surface gleams with an almost fanatical polish. The wide, sturdy oak doors, their handles fashioned from dark, tarnished iron, stand closed, sealing off the chamber from the muffled cacophony of the courthouse corridors. The floor, laid with large, veined slabs of dark green marble, reflects the artificial light in fractured patterns, creating a dizzying effect that seems to pull the gaze downwards. Rows of dark, unpadded wooden benches, worn smooth by countless anonymous hands, face the elevated dais, their uniform arrangement adding to the rigid formality. A subtle, almost imperceptible hum emanates from the archaic air conditioning system, a low thrum that vibrates. Through the floorboards, a constant droning reminder of the building's functional yet chilling purpose. Dust motes caught in the sparse, weak beams of light that manage to penetrate the drapes dance a slow, eternal waltz, suspended in the heavy, still air, each particle a silent witness to the countless dramas that have unfolded within these walls. The silence, punctuated only by the occasional shuffling of feet or the rustle of papers, is profound, a reverent hush that demands respect and instills a sense of foreboding. Perched imperiously upon the towering judge's bench, a monolithic structure of dark, carved wood that dominates the entire room, sits Judge Alistair Caldwell. His presence is as substantial as the furniture itself. His frame, broad and portly, fills the high-backed leather chair, its polished surface creaking faintly under his weight. He wears his judicial robes with an air of practiced entitlement, the heavy black fabric draping over his shoulders like a king's. Mantle, the crisp white of his shirt collar and the precisely knotted silk tie, a muted shade of burgundy, offer the only contrast to the somber black, emphasizing his meticulously groomed appearance. His silver hair, thick and immaculately coiffed, shows no signs of disarray, each strand seemingly in its appointed place. A pair of gold-rimmed spectacles rests low on his aquiline nose, allowing him to peer over the top, his gaze, often distant and bored, sweeping across the courtroom with an air of weary disdain. Judge Caldwell possesses the jowly face of a man accustomed to indulgence, his cheeks slightly flushed, his lips often pursed in a thin, disapproving line. His right hand, adorned with a heavy signet ring bearing an indecipherable crest, taps a polished ebony gavel against the wood of the bench with a slow, rhythmic insistence, a sound that echoes loudly in the hushed chamber, each tap a declaration of his absolute authority. His body language speaks volumes of his condescension. He leans back, his posture radiating an almost aggressive indolence, as if the proceedings are a tiresome interruption to a more important engagement. He sighs, a long, drawn-out exhalation that is audible even in the quiet room, a performative expression of his profound impatience. He frequently glances at the large, ornate grandfather clock positioned on the far wall, its slow, deliberate ticking a constant, maddening counterpoint to his perceived inefficiency of the court. He views the individuals before him not as citizens seeking justice, but as mere cogs in a grinding, monotonous machine, their individual plights trivial, their narratives predictable. He believes himself to be a bastion of order, a gatekeeper of a system he fundamentally controls, and his rulings, often swift and unyielding, reflect an ingrained belief in his own infallible judgment. His reputation precedes him, stern, unyielding, and utterly devoid of patience for what he considers extraneous details or emotional appeals. He often pronounces judgment with a detached, almost clinical precision, as if he is merely reciting a pre-written decree. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, hold a glint of something cold and calculating, betraying a mind that has long ago ceased to truly engage with the human element of the law. He savors the silence he commands, the way people visibly flinch when his gaze settles upon them, the palpable fear that emanates from the defense table. A quiet rustle near. The heavy oak door signals a new arrival, a subtle disturbance in the court's carefully maintained equilibrium. Jamal Thompson steps into the hushed confines of courtroom 3B, his entrance as unassuming as a shadow. He is young, barely 18, his slender frame appearing almost fragile against the imposing backdrop of the room. His skin, a rich, deep ebony, seems to absorb the meager light, making him appear even more understated. He wears a simple dark blue hoodie, its fabric slightly faded, but impeccably clean, and a pair of dark jeans that are also well worn but neat. His sneakers, though scuffed, show no signs of neglect. There is no expensive suit, no crisp shirt, no outward display of status or wealth that might lend him gravitas in this intimidating arena. His hair is cut short, neatly faded on the sides, framing a face that, despite its youth, holds a surprising depth. His dark eyes, large and intelligent, scan the room with a quiet intensity, absorbing every detail, yet betraying no obvious emotion. He carries a worn black canvas backpack slung casually over one shoulder, its contents unknown, and nothing else. No briefcase, no stack of legal papers. He seems utterly alone. Jamal's posture is initially a study in quiet nervousness, his shoulders slightly hunched, his hands tucked into his pockets. He moves with a hesitant grace, his footsteps barely audible on the polished marble. He walks towards the defense table, which seems impossibly far away, an island in the vast, intimidating ocean of the courtroom. The public defender assigned to his case, a young woman named Ms. Chen, whose own face bears the weary lines of an overworked professional, offers him a quick, almost apologetic nod, her expression conveying a mixture of sympathy and resignation. Jamal settles into the chair beside her, a subtle creak of wood betraying his movement. He does not fidget. His hands emerge from his pockets and rest on his knees, palms down, a picture of quiet, stillness. He looks small, outmatched, utterly powerless against the monolithic authority embodied by Judge Caldwell and the entire judicial system. His youth is a stark contrast to the seasoned professionals who dominate the space, and his apparent lack of resources is glaringly evident. He seems like a lamb led to slaughter, an innocent caught in a machinery far too vast and complex for him to comprehend, let alone navigate. The weight of the court, the expectations of guilt, the casually dismissal of his existence, all seem to press down on his slight frame. Judge Caldwell's gaze, which had been fixed on the wall clock, now drifts towards the defense table, settling on Jamal with a dismissive flick of his eyes. He clears his throat, a loud grating sound that cuts through the silence. "Mr. Thompson," he states, his voice a low rumble, tinged with a distinct note of weary condescension. "Your case, aggravated trespass, a misdemeanor, yet one that seems to plague my docket with remarkable frequency." He does not wait for a response. He glances at a file on his bench, barely opening it, as if the contents are already known and utterly uninteresting. "The prosecution informs me you were found on private property after hours near a restricted data center. Is that correct?" Before Ms. Chen can even lean forward to respond on Jamal's behalf, the judge continues, his tone dripping with an almost theatrical impatience. "Another young man, another foolish mistake. Do you truly understand the implications of such actions, Mr. Thompson? Or do you simply believe the rules do not apply to you?" He pauses, but it is not an invitation for a reply, merely a rhetorical flourish. This court has little patience for those who disregard the law, particularly when it comes to sensitive infrastructure. Our society operates on order, on adherence to established regulations. Your actions disrupt that order. He leans forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Do you have anything to say for yourself, young man? Or is this another case of youthful indiscretion masked by a complete lack of foresight?" He pronounces the word foresight with a sneer, as if the very concept is alien to Jamal. Jamal, despite the judge's cutting remarks and the palpable disdain in his voice, remains remarkably composed. He does not flinch, does not fidget. His eyes, however, are no longer simply observing. They are piercing, focusing on Judge Caldwell with an intensity that seems to bore into the judge's very essence. A flicker of something unreadable crosses Jamal's face, a brief, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, but his expression remains otherwise placid. He does not speak, allowing Ms. Chen to begin her prepared statement, explaining the circumstances, attempting to mitigate the perceived offense. But the judge cuts her off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand, his impatience boiling over. "Ms. Chen, I have heard these excuses countless times. He didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. The fact remains he was where he shouldn't have been. The law is clear." The judge leans back again, his gaze sweeping over Jamal once more, a look of profound boredom settling on his features. "Unless you have some truly extraordinary explanation, Mr. Thompson, I am inclined to expedite this process. We have a full docket, and frankly, these minor infractions consume valuable court time that could be dedicated to more substantial matters." His words are a deliberate slight, an open declaration of Jamal's perceived insignificance. He implies that Jamal's very existence is an inconvenience, a waste of his precious time. He toys with his gavel again, the rhythmic tapping growing louder, more insistent, a drumbeat of impending judgment. But as the judge continues his tirade, dismissing Jamal with every word, a subtle shift occurs in Jamal's demeanor. His shoulders, initially hunched, subtly straighten. His dark eyes, which had been fixed on the judge, now briefly dart to the worn backpack at his feet, then to his own left wrist. There, peeking out from beneath the cuff of his hoodie, is not a flashy watch, but a simple, almost utilitarian digital timepiece, its face dark, unlit. He touches it with a single, precise finger, a motion so quick and subtle that only an omniscient observer would notice. It is not a nervous gesture, but one of deliberate, almost anticipatory activation. A faint, almost imperceptible glow emanates from the watch face for a split second, then vanishes. A barely perceptible, knowing glint enters Jamal's eyes, a spark of something profound that belies his youthful appearance and the seemingly powerless situation. He looks at Judge Caldwell again, and this time, there is no fear, no resignation, but a quiet, almost unsettling confidence. It is the look of a person who possesses a secret, a hidden ace, a profound understanding that the powerful figure before him utterly lacks. The judge, lost in his own self-importance, misses it entirely, too consumed by his condescending pronouncements to notice the subtle shift in the young man's gaze, the quiet intelligence that now burns in the depths of those dark eyes. He sees only another statistic, another fleeting interruption, completely oblivious to the fact that the seemingly insignificant young man before him holds the key to the very foundation of his career, ready to unlock it in a matter of minutes. Judge Alistair Caldwell's thick fingers, adorned with the heavy signet ring, tap the polished ebony gavel with increasing impatience, each percussive sound echoing with a hollow finality in the hushed courtroom. His pale, watery blue eyes, narrowed to slits, fixate on Jamal, a simmering irritation churning beneath their placid surface. He views the young man's quiet stillness not as composure, but as a defiant lack of remorse, an insolence born of ignorance and a pervasive disregard for authority. Another one, he thinks, his internal monologue a well-worn track of dismissive judgments. Another entitled youth, always believing the rules do not apply to them, always with some flimsy excuse or a public defender spouting legalistic nonsense. He mentally categorizes Jamal instantly, slotting him into a predefined pigeonhole. Black, young, apparently without means, undoubtedly a product of a broken home or a misguided sense of street wisdom. The judge's inherent biases, honed over decades on the bench, color his perception. He sees not an individual but a stereotype, a predictable statistic in the endless procession of minor offenders that clogs his docket. His jowly face, usually set in an expression of weary disdain, now tightens slightly, a muscle twitching near his jawline, betraying a deeper annoyance. Ms. Chen, sensing the judge's escalating impatience, attempts once more to interject, her voice a quiet, earnest murmur as she begins to explain Jamal's unique circumstances, hinting at research and academic pursuits, attempting to paint a picture of a student, not a delinquent. But Judge Caldwell cuts her off with a sharp, almost violent wave of his hand, his large frame shifting imperiously in the high-backed leather chair, which groans faintly in protest. He finds her efforts tiresome, a predictable charade. Always the same story, he muses, his thoughts laced with a profound cynicism. They try to humanize them, to make excuses, to waste the court's valuable time with irrelevant narratives. He believes that facts are facts, and the fact as he sees it is that Jamal Thompson was where he should not have been. His mind has already rendered its verdict, long before any formal pronouncement. He thinks of the time-consuming paperwork, the bureaucratic delays, the sheer inefficiency of a system that demands he listen to such trivialities. He leans forward slightly, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom, daring anyone to challenge his authority, his eyes lingering for a moment on the public gallery, as if to remind them of the power he wields. "Ms. Chen," Judge Caldwell states, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, edged with a barely contained exasperation. "This court has a schedule to maintain. The facts of the matter are quite clear, are they not? Mr. Thompson was found on private property, after hours, in proximity to a restricted facility. These are not complex issues. There is no ambiguity in the law regarding trespass." He does not wait for her reply, his words flowing into each other, forming an unbroken cascade of dismissive pronouncements. "Unless you intend to present evidence that fundamentally alters the nature of this offense, I see no reason to prolong these proceedings. We are not here for character testimonials or philosophical debates on youthful curiosity." He gestures vaguely towards the file on his bench, a file he barely consults, as if its contents are a mere formality, a tiresome obligation rather than a source of information. His tapping gavel picks up speed, a rapid, staccato rhythm that seems to underscore the accelerating pace of his judgment. He thinks of his upcoming golf game, of the expensive scotch waiting for him at home, of anything but the young man before him. He sees Jamal as an obstacle, a minor irritation in his perfectly ordered day. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurs within Judge Caldwell. He feels a surge of self-satisfaction, a quiet pride in his own decisiveness. He has always prided himself on his efficiency, his ability to cut through what he considers red tape and emotional theatrics. He believes that a strong hand is necessary to maintain order, especially with these types who seem to believe they are above the law. His internal thoughts drift to past cases, similar scenarios where he swiftly dispensed justice, always confident in his actions, always secure in the knowledge that his rulings, however abrupt, would stand. He has faced no serious repercussions for his expeditious methods, no challenges to his absolute authority in his courtroom. The higher courts, he believes, are too busy with actual crimes to bother with the minor procedural nuances of a simple trespass case. He considers himself a bastion of the legal system, a bulwark against chaos, and in his mind, bending minor rules to achieve what he perceives as a just and efficient outcome is not corruption, but pragmatism. He even allows himself a brief, smug smile, a fleeting expression of quiet triumph that quickly vanishes, replaced by his usual austere demeanor. Given the clear circumstances, Judge Caldwell continues, his voice now imbued with a tone of unassailable certainty, and the apparent lack of mitigating factors that would warrant further deliberation, this court finds Mr. Thompson guilty of aggravated trespass. A fine of $500 is imposed, along with a 6-month suspended sentence, conditioned on his strict adherence to all local ordinances, and a prohibition from entering any private property without explicit written consent for a period of 2 years. He states the judgment with a detached, clinical precision, as if reading from a pre-written script, his eyes already drifting towards the clock on the wall, calculating the minutes saved. He expects the usual quiet acceptance, the defeated slump of shoulders, the hurried, whispered consultation between client and counsel. He has seen it countless times, but Jamal Thompson does not slump. He does not whisper. His dark eyes, which had been fixed on the judge, now briefly glance downwards, his gaze resting for a fleeting moment on the simple, utilitarian digital watch peeking from beneath his hoodie cuff. A faint, almost imperceptible pulse of light emanates from its dark face. A brief internal flicker, then extinguishes itself. This time, however, the activation is not merely anticipatory. It is a signal, a silent declaration of readiness. His posture, which had subtly straightened earlier, now becomes almost unnervingly still, radiating a profound, unshakable calm that seems to absorb the oppressive atmosphere of the courtroom rather than be crushed by it. He knows this moment, this precise precipice of judgment, is the one he is prepared for. His mind, even in the face of the judge's swift and damning pronouncement, remains remarkably clear, a highly organized database of facts and contingencies. He thinks of the countless late nights spent in the hushed quiet of the public library, the glow of a borrowed laptop illuminating his face, sifting through obscure municipal codes, corporate filings, and environmental impact reports. He remembers the frustrating dead ends, the moments of doubt, the sheer overwhelming complexity of the system he sought to challenge. But then there were the breakthroughs, the unexpected connections, the threads of information that, when woven together, formed a damning tapestry. He had not gone to the data center out of youthful indiscretion or simple curiosity. He had gone because the data, the truth, was there, hidden behind layers of corporate secrecy and legal obfuscation. His motivation was not personal gain, but a burning sense of injustice, a quiet fury at the systematic disregard for the vulnerable, for the voiceless. He thinks of his neighborhood, of the families displaced, of the broken promises, of the insidious pollution that seeped into their lives, invisible yet pervasive. The data center, ostensibly a symbol of technological progress, was, in his meticulous research, a linchpin in a much larger, more nefarious scheme. He needed proof, undeniable evidence that could not be dismissed as mere hearsay or the ramblings of a troublemaker. He knew the risks, the potential consequences, but the alternative, silence, complicity, was unthinkable. His calm is not born of a lack of fear, but from a profound conviction that he is doing what is right, what is necessary. He is a quiet storm, gathering strength, waiting for the precise moment of impact. Just as Judge Caldwell's hand reaches for his gavel, preparing to deliver the final authoritative tap that would seal Jamal's fate and dismiss him from the court's memory, a calm, clear voice, remarkably steady for its youth, cuts through the expectant silence. It is Jamal. He does not raise his voice, nor does he fidget. He simply speaks, his words carefully chosen, each syllable weighted with an unexpected precision. "Your Honor," Jamal begins, his gaze fixed directly on Judge Caldwell, his dark eyes holding an unsettling, almost prescient knowingness. "The prosecution states I was found on private property, near a restricted data center. It is true. I was there." He pauses, allowing his initial admission to sink in, to affirm the judge's perceived victory. Judge Caldwell's hand freezes mid-air, his jowly face momentarily slackening. A flicker of surprise, then annoyance, crossing his features. He had expected silence, perhaps a muttered protest from Ms. Chen, but not a direct address from the defendant, and certainly not one delivered with such composed certainty. He clears his throat, a loud grating sound, his expression hardening into a stern mask. "Mr. Thompson," he states, his voice a low warning, "the court has rendered its judgment. Your opportunity to speak was prior to this ruling. This is not the time for further remarks." He implies that Jamal is out of line, disrupting the decorum. But Jamal, undeterred, continues, his voice unwavering, his words flowing with an almost practiced cadence, demonstrating a command of language far beyond what Caldwell would expect from one of them. "Respectfully, Your Honor," Jamal says, the polite address delivered without a hint of subservience, "I believe there is a crucial detail missing from the prosecution's narrative, a detail that directly pertains to the restricted nature of that data center, and indeed to the very definition of private property in this specific instance." He pauses again, his eyes unwavering, holding Caldwell's gaze. Specifically, Your Honor, I refer to the environmental impact assessment filed by Omnicorp Data Solutions for that very facility, dated October 17th, 2 years ago, and the subsequent amendments regarding their wastewater discharge permits, particularly those pertaining to the accidental release of industrial solvents into the municipal drainage system, which, as you know, eventually flows into the public wetlands bordering the property. A palpable silence descends upon the courtroom, heavier and more profound than before. Judge Caldwell's eyes, which had been dismissively cold, now widen almost imperceptibly. His face, usually a picture of bored condescension, now registers a fleeting, almost imperceptible tremor of something akin to shock. The specific date, the corporate name, the mention of environmental permits and industrial solvents. These are not the ramblings of a simple trespasser. These are details, precise and highly specific, that suggest a depth of knowledge that completely contradicts his preconceived notions of Jamal Thompson. The judge's mind races, a sudden jolt of unease piercing through his carefully constructed facade of authority. Omnicorp Data Solutions. The name echoes in his mind, a faint, unsettling chime. He immediately thinks of certain investments, certain connections, certain social circles. He believes he is a master of the courtroom, an unquestionable authority. But Jamal's words have just introduced a variable he did not anticipate, a complex and potentially embarrassing element into what he considered an open and shut case. He looks at Jamal with a new, sharper intensity, no longer seeing a mere statistic, but a sudden, unexpected threat. The calm intelligence in Jamal's dark eyes, previously dismissed as insolence, now appears as something far more formidable, something almost unnerving. The judge's hand, still hovering over the gavel, trembles ever so slightly, the polished ebony seeming to mock his momentarily suspended power. Judge Alistair Caldwell's jowly face, a landscape of accustomed authority, contorts almost imperceptibly, a fleeting ripple of something beyond mere annoyance disturbing its placid surface. His hand, still suspended above the ebony gavel, trembles with a barely perceptible tremor, a silent testament to the unexpected jolt Jamal's words have delivered. The specific corporate name, Omnicorp Data Solutions, the precise date of the environmental impact assessment, the chilling mention of industrial solvents and public wetlands. These are not the vague, unsubstantiated claims he expects from a young man he has already pigeonholed and dismissed. His pale, watery blue eyes, which usually hold only a glint of detached disdain, now narrow into suspicious slits, his gaze no longer sweeping but piercing, focusing on Jamal with a sudden, unnerving intensity. A cold knot of apprehension tightens in his stomach, a sensation utterly foreign to his well-ordered world. He clears his throat, a sound harsher and more prolonged than before, an attempt to reassert control over a courtroom that, for a fleeting moment, seems to have slipped from his grasp. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caldwell states, his voice a low, guttural growl, stripped of its previous veneer of weary condescension, now edged with a nascent, dangerous fury. "This court has already delivered its verdict. You are in contempt of court for continuing to speak after a ruling has been made. I warn you, young man, your insolence will not be tolerated. The consequences for such disrespect are severe." His words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken threats, a palpable warning designed to crush any further defiance. He leans forward, his substantial frame pressing against the polished wood of the bench, his eyes fixed on Jamal, a silent challenge in their depths. He believes he is delivering the ultimate blow, a final, unassailable declaration of his absolute power, one that will force Jamal into immediate, cowering submission. This is his most egregious act of abuse, a blatant misuse of judicial authority to silence inconvenient truths, to punish not a crime, but a challenge to his perceived infallibility. He views Jamal's continued presence and his precise articulation not as a legitimate legal argument, but as a personal affront, an audacious attempt to undermine his court, his reputation, his very standing. He feels a hot flush creep up his neck, a sensation of being exposed, even though he cannot yet articulate why. Ms. Chen, her face a mask of horrified apprehension, makes a small, involuntary gasp, her hand reaching out towards Jamal as if to physically restrain him, her eyes wide with a silent plea for him to stop. She knows the judge's temper, his vindictive streak. Contempt charges are not a trivial matter, especially when wielded by a judge like Caldwell. The potential for a far more severe sentence, even jail time, looms large. But Jamal, despite the judge's explicit threat, despite Ms. Chen's desperate signal, remains utterly unperturbed. His stillness is absolute, an almost unnatural calm in the face of such aggressive authority. His dark eyes, unwavering, continue to hold Judge Caldwell's gaze, not with defiance, but with a quiet, almost unsettling certainty. He does not flinch, does not even blink. This unshakable composure only serves to further infuriate the judge, who interprets it as a deliberate provocation, a silent sneer at his power. Jamal's internal landscape is a vast, meticulously organized library of information, each fact cross-referenced, each legal precedent carefully considered. He had anticipated this moment, this precise escalation of the judge's arrogance. He had spent countless nights meticulously mapping out Caldwell's known procedural habits, his biases, his typical reactions to perceived challenges. He knows that the judge's immediate instinct is to shut down anything that threatens his control, to dismiss anything that complicates his simplified view of justice. This threat of contempt, Jamal realizes, is not merely a reaction. It is a confirmation that he has struck a nerve, that his words carry a weight the judge cannot simply ignore. He allows the judge's threat to hang in the air for a beat longer, letting the oppressive silence amplify its weight before he speaks again. His voice, still calm, still clear, now carries an almost imperceptible edge of steel, a quiet authority that seems to emanate from the very depths of his conviction. "Your Honor," Jamal states, his tone respectful yet firm, "I fully understand the gravity of a contempt charge. However, I believe it is critical to the integrity of these proceedings, and indeed to the very foundation of justice, that the court acknowledges certain procedural errors that have occurred." He pauses, his gaze briefly flicking to Ms. Chen, a silent reassurance passing between them, before returning to the judge. "Specifically, Your Honor, I refer to Rule 17, Section B, Subsection 3 of the State Civil Procedure Code, which mandates that all relevant and material evidence, including that which may mitigate the defendant's alleged culpability, shall be fully heard and considered by the court prior to the rendering of a final judgment or sentencing." Judge Caldwell's eyes widen fractionally, a jolt of genuine surprise rippling through him. He recognizes the rule. It is a fundamental tenet of due process, one he usually pays lip service to, but often circumvents in minor cases for the sake of expediency. His jowly face, which had been flushed with anger, now takes on a slightly ashen hue. A faint sheen of perspiration appears on his forehead. His tapping gavel, which had been poised for a definitive strike, now hovers, motionless, in his trembling hand. He suddenly feels a prickle of unease, a cold sensation that has nothing to do with the court's archaic air conditioning. He tries to recall the exact wording of Rule 17, Section B, Subsection 3, but his mind, usually sharp and decisive, feels strangely clouded, a sudden fog of uncertainty descending upon it. He glances quickly towards his clerk, a young woman named Ms. Davies, who sits quietly at her desk below the bench, her fingers poised over her keyboard. He expects her to offer some silent confirmation, some reassuring nod, but her gaze remains fixed on her screen, her expression unreadable. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Jamal continues, his voice gaining a subtle momentum, each word a carefully placed stone in a meticulously constructed argument, "I believe the court's swift declaration of guilt, without allowing for the presentation of this exculpatory evidence, constitutes a violation of my fundamental right to a fair hearing, as guaranteed by the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, specifically the Due Process Clause." He states the constitutional amendment with an ease and familiarity that utterly disarms the judge. This is not the language of a street kid or an ignorant youth. This is the language of a scholar, a legal mind, someone who has not merely skimmed a few articles but has delved deep into the intricate tapestry of the law. The blood drains from Judge Caldwell's face, leaving it pale and mottled. His initial anger begins to recede, replaced by a cold, creeping fear. The mention of the 14th Amendment, a cornerstone of American jurisprudence, elevates Jamal's challenge from a mere procedural quibble to a grave constitutional matter. Such a violation, if proven, could lead to an appeal, a reversal, and a formal reprimand from the Judicial Oversight Committee. His carefully cultivated reputation, his long and seemingly unblemished career, suddenly feel precarious, teetering on the edge of a precipice. He shifts uncomfortably in his high-backed leather chair, the leather groaning audibly beneath his weight. His gaze darts around the courtroom, seeking an escape, a distraction, anything to break the unnerving intensity of Jamal's unwavering stare. He glances at Ms. Chen, hoping for her to intervene, to silence her client, but she merely watches Jamal, a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer of awe growing in her eyes. The information regarding Omnicorp Data Solutions' environmental impact, Your Honor. Jamal presses on, his voice a steady, relentless current, is not merely a character testimonial or a philosophical debate. It is directly relevant to the definition of private property in this specific context. My research, meticulously documented and verifiable, indicates that Omnicorp Data Solutions, through a series of undisclosed waivers and regulatory oversights, has been operating that data center in direct violation of federal and state environmental protection statutes. He cites a specific federal act, its name long and complex, then a state statute, both delivered without hesitation, as if he is merely reciting a well-known poem. These violations, Your Honor, specifically pertain to their wastewater discharge, which, as I previously stated, contaminates public wetlands. Under established legal precedent, particularly in cases involving environmental contamination and public health risks, property that is actively and knowingly polluting public resources often loses certain aspects of its private designation, especially when considering trespass in the context of whistleblowing or investigative journalism. Judge Caldwell's mind is reeling. He feels a sudden, intense heat, a flush that has nothing to do with anger and everything to do with panic. His meticulously coiffed silver hair suddenly feels heavy, his judicial robes stifling. He finds himself fumbling with the papers on his bench, his large fingers clumsy and uncoordinated. He tries to remember if he has ever heard of such a precedent, such a nuanced interpretation of property law, but his memory, usually so reliable, seems to have abandoned him. The sheer volume of specific, detailed information flowing from Jamal, delivered with such calm conviction, is overwhelming. He had dismissed Jamal as an uneducated delinquent, a simple-minded trespasser. Now he sees a formidable intellect, a mind that has clearly outmaneuvered him. The quiet confidence in Jamal's dark eyes, which he had previously dismissed as insolence, now appears as a terrifyingly precise weapon. My presence on that property, Your Honor, Jamal continues, his voice rising slightly, not in volume, but in a profound sense of purpose, was not an act of youthful indiscretion or disregard for the law. It was an act of necessary investigation. The data I sought to verify, the evidence of Omnicorp's egregious environmental negligence, is directly linked to the health and well-being of the community surrounding that facility, a community that includes my own family and neighbors. This contamination, Your Honor, has led to documented increases in respiratory illnesses and skin conditions in the adjacent public housing complex. Omnicorp has consistently suppressed this information, and the regulatory agencies, due to what appears to be a systemic failure of oversight, have done little to intervene. The courtroom air crackles with an almost unbearable tension. The silence is no longer reverent. It is a charged, electric void, filled only by Jamal's steady voice and the frantic internal turmoil of Judge Caldwell. The judge's breathing becomes shallow, almost ragged. He wipes a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, his heavy signet ring glinting under the cold LED lights. His gaze darts to the clock on the wall, no longer calculating minutes saved, but desperately searching for time, for an escape, for a way out of this rapidly escalating nightmare. He sees the public gallery, previously a blur of anonymous faces, now looking at him with an unexpected intensity, their silent attention suddenly a heavy burden. He feels exposed, vulnerable, stripped of his usual impenetrable facade. He has built his career on being the unyielding authority, the one who dictates, not the one who is questioned. Furthermore, Your Honor, Jamal states, his voice now carrying a subtle note of challenge, Your Honor's decision to cut off Ms. Chen, my counsel, during her attempt to present mitigating circumstances and to prematurely deliver a verdict without allowing for the full presentation of evidence, including the specific legal precedents regarding public interest and private property, constitutes a clear violation of both my Sixth Amendment right to effective counsel and the aforementioned 14th Amendment due process clause. These are not minor infractions, Your Honor. These are fundamental breaches of judicial conduct. The words land like a series of hammer blows, each one striking at the very foundation of Judge Caldwell's authority. Breaches of judicial conduct. The phrase reverberates in his mind, a terrifying echo. He feels a sudden, overwhelming wave of nausea. His meticulously groomed appearance, his composure, his carefully constructed persona of infallible judgment, all begin to unravel. His jowly face sags, his lips, usually pursed in a thin, disapproving line, now hang slightly agape. He looks utterly bewildered, his pale eyes glazed over with a mixture of fear and confusion. He had entered this courtroom expecting another swift, effortless victory, another statistic easily dispatched. Instead, he finds himself trapped, exposed, and utterly outmaneuvered by a young man he had so casually dismissed. The quiet intelligence in Jamal's eyes, once ignored, now seems to burn with an almost righteous indignation, reflecting back to the judge the full extent of his own arrogance and prejudice. The gavel slips slightly in his trembling hand, a small, almost inaudible shift, but in the profound silence of courtroom 3B, it sounds like a monument beginning to crack. Judge Alistair Caldwell's jowly face, a map of his crumbling composure, drains of all color, leaving behind a sallow, mottled pallor. His pale, watery blue eyes, once filled with dismissive disdain, now dart frantically around the hushed courtroom, seeking an escape, a lifeline, any shred of the control that had, moments ago, felt so absolute. The heavy signet ring on his right hand, a symbol of his entrenched authority, slips slightly on his suddenly clammy finger as his hand, still hovering over the ebony gavel, trembles uncontrollably. The gavel itself, once an extension of his power, now feels like a dead weight, an inert object mocking his suspended judgment. A cold, nauseating wave washes over him, a visceral sensation of profound dread that clutches at his stomach and constricts his throat. The very air in courtroom 3B, usually so still and heavy, now feels thin, almost suffocating, as if all oxygen has been drawn into the vortex of Jamal's quiet, devastating pronouncements. He hears Jamal's words echoing in the sudden, profound silence, each syllable a precise, targeted strike. Fundamental breaches of judicial conduct. The phrase reverberates, a death knell for his carefully constructed world. His mind, usually so sharp in its cynical calculations, now spins wildly, a frantic kaleidoscope of worst-case scenarios. He envisions the formal complaints, the ethics investigations, the public scrutiny, the humiliating headlines that would inevitably follow. His reputation, meticulously built over decades of stern rulings and unyielding pronouncements, his carefully cultivated image as an unassailable bastion of justice, now splinters before his very eyes. He thinks of the powerful figures he has cultivated, the influential friends who would undoubtedly distance themselves from a disgraced judge. He thinks of his retirement, his comfortable lifestyle, the future he had so confidently planned, all of it suddenly teetering on the brink of an abyss, pulled there by a young man he had dismissed as a mere statistic, an insignificant inconvenience. The very concept of due process, a phrase he had often mouthed with detached indifference, now takes on a terrifying personal relevance. Ms. Chen, sitting beside Jamal, watches the judge with a mixture of dawning awe and quiet satisfaction. Her initial apprehension has dissipated, replaced by a profound respect for her young client. She sees the methodical precision with which Jamal dismantles the judge's assumptions, the quiet power in his voice as he wields legal knowledge with the finesse of a seasoned advocate. Her gaze flickers to Jamal, a silent question in her eyes, a readiness to follow his lead, to support this unexpected righteous rebellion. The young clerk, Ms. Davies, below the bench, subtly shifts in her chair, her eyes, previously fixed on her screen, now darting between Jamal and the rapidly unraveling judge. A faint, almost imperceptible flicker of recognition, perhaps even surprise, crosses her features as Jamal speaks of specific legal codes, suggesting that even she, immersed daily in the minutiae of the court, acknowledges the depth of his unexpected expertise. Jamal, utterly unperturbed by the judge's visible distress, continues his systematic dismantling of the court's flawed proceedings. His voice, still calm and clear, now possesses a chilling, almost surgical precision, each word a carefully placed piece in an intricate puzzle. "Your Honor," Jamal states, his dark eyes unwavering, fixed on the judge's rapidly paling face. "The prosecution's entire case rests upon the premise that Omnicorp Data Solutions property is unequivocally private, and that my presence there constitutes trespass. However, this premise is fundamentally flawed, not only due to the environmental violations I have already cited, but also due to a critical oversight in the initial property zoning and the subsequent allocation of public easements." He pauses, allowing the gravity of his statement to sink in, his gaze holding the judge's, forcing Caldwell to confront the uncomfortable truth. "My investigation, which included a meticulous review of municipal land records, zoning ordinances from 1998, and the original construction permits for that specific site," Jamal continues, his voice gaining a quiet, relentless momentum, "reveals that a significant portion of the land currently occupied by the data center was, in fact, designated as a public utility easement for stormwater management and public access pathways during its initial acquisition. This easement was never legally vacated or transferred. Omnicorp merely erected fencing and restricted access signs over existing public rights-of-way, effectively privatizing land that, by legal definition, remains partially public." Judge Caldwell's eyes bulge slightly. "Public utility easement." The words hit him like a physical blow. He knows instinctively the profound implications of such a claim. If true, it would not only invalidate the trespass charge but also expose Omnicorp to massive legal liability for illegally obstructing public access and misrepresenting property boundaries. More critically, it would highlight a colossal failure of oversight on the part of the city and, by extension, the court, for prosecuting a case based on a false premise. His mind races, trying to recall any memory of such a detail from the case file, but his memory offers nothing but a terrifying void. He had simply trusted the prosecution's summary, the standard boilerplate for trespass cases. He had been too arrogant, too dismissive to delve into the underlying property records. The magnitude of his oversight, his willful ignorance, now crushes him. A bead of sweat drips from his temple, tracing a cold path down his flushed cheek. He feels a sudden tightness in his chest, his breathing becoming shallow and ragged, a faint wheezing sound escaping his lips. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Jamal presses on, oblivious to the judge's escalating distress, his internal clock ticking with precise, unyielding determination, "the specific, restricted data center you refer to, despite its heavily fortified appearance, is not merely a server farm. My research into Omnicorp's corporate filings, specifically their SEC Form 10-K filings from the past 3 fiscal years, alongside their internal project proposals leaked by a former employee, information I accessed through publicly available whistleblower protection platforms, indicates that the facility houses proprietary bioreactor technology. This technology, ostensibly for data-driven environmental remediation, has in practice been used to process and illegally dispose of highly toxic chemical waste from their other industrial operations, disguised as treated wastewater before being discharged into the public drainage system. The air in the courtroom grows colder, a chilling realization spreading through the few people in the gallery who are now leaning forward, their faces etched with stunned disbelief. Judge Caldwell's jaw goes slack, his eyes wide with horror fix on Jamal, no longer seeing a young man, but a spectral harbinger of his professional ruin. Toxic chemical waste. The words resonate with a terrifying clarity. This is no longer a simple trespass case. This is a full-blown environmental scandal, a corporate conspiracy potentially involving gross negligence, public endangerment, and systemic regulatory corruption. He thinks of the news reports, the public outcry, the political fallout. He thinks of his name, Judge Alistair Caldwell, irrevocably linked to such a catastrophe, exposed as either complicit or utterly incompetent. His large frame seems to shrink in the high-backed leather chair, his posture slumping, the previous air of aggressive indolence replaced by one of profound, abject defeat. He fumbles for his water glass, his hand shaking so violently that the water sloshes over the rim, spilling onto the polished wood of the bench, a dark, spreading stain that mirrors the stain on his career. "The industrial solvents I mentioned earlier, Your Honor," Jamal continues, his voice unwavering, delivering the details with the calm authority of a lecturer, "are specifically trichloroethylene, benzene, and tetrachloroethylene. These, are known carcinogens and neurotoxins. Omnicorp's discharge permits, which I have cross-referenced with EPA regulations and state health department guidelines, limit the permissible levels of these chemicals to parts per billion. My independent water quality tests, conducted using publicly available kits and then verified by a pro bono environmental science lab, show concentrations in the discharge outflow and the adjacent wetlands exceeding those limits by factors of hundreds, in some cases, thousands." He pauses, allowing the full weight of the scientific data to settle in the stunned silence. "Furthermore," Jamal adds, his voice now carrying a subtle, almost imperceptible note of indignation, "the increase in respiratory illnesses, skin conditions, and even specific types of cancers in the public housing complex bordering the wetlands, which I referenced, are documented in confidential health department reports from the past 3 years. These reports, deliberately suppressed and classified under sensitive public health data to avoid public panic, were also obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, filed under a pseudonym after initial attempts were stonewalled. The correlation between the Omnicorp discharge and the health crisis in my community is statistically undeniable, Your Honor." Judge Caldwell's face is now ashen, his lips a thin, trembling line. His breath comes in short, shallow gasps. He feels a cold sweat break out across his entire body, soaking his pristine white shirt beneath his robes. The meticulous coiffure of his silver hair, previously so immaculate, now seems to stand on end, a silent testament to his internal turmoil. He looks utterly broken, his eyes glazed over with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He had prided himself on his control, his ability to manipulate the system to his advantage, to dismiss the inconvenient truths of the common man. Now a young man, a statistic, has turned the very system he controlled into a weapon against him, exposing his willful blindness, his complicity through inaction. The sheer depth of Jamal's research, the meticulous detail, the cross-referencing of legal documents, corporate filings, environmental regulations, FOIA requests, and even independent scientific tests. It is overwhelming, undeniable, and utterly devastating. This is not just a procedural error. This is a systemic failure, and Caldwell is now squarely implicated. My presence on that property, Your Honor, Jamal states, his voice rising slightly, imbued with a newfound righteous authority that fills the courtroom, was not an act of aggravated trespass. It was an act of necessary civil investigation, an attempt to gather undeniable proof of corporate malfeasance and environmental criminality that directly impacts public health and violates established public easements. My actions, far from being a disregard for the law, were an attempt to uphold the very spirit of the law, to bring to light egregious violations that the regulatory bodies, and indeed this very court, have seemingly overlooked or actively ignored. The power dynamics in courtroom 3B have visibly, irrevocably shifted. Judge Caldwell, once imperious and imposing, now seems small, diminished, his substantial frame hunched, his gaze unfocused, his entire being radiating defeat. His hand, still trembling, slowly lowers the gavel, not in a deliberate gesture of power, but in a defeated surrender. It clatters, softly against the polished wood of the bench, a faint, almost inaudible sound that, in the profound silence, echoes like a cannon shot. Jamal, on the other hand, stands tall, his slender frame now radiating an unshakable confidence, his dark eyes burning with a quiet, fierce intelligence. He holds the attention of everyone in the room, not through bluster or intimidation, but through the sheer, undeniable force of his knowledge and the moral weight of his cause. The courtroom, once a mausoleum of justice controlled by Caldwell, has become a stage for Jamal's revelation, a platform from which he exposes the rot beneath the polished facade. He is no longer the accused. He is the accuser, and the judge, once the unyielding authority, now finds himself in the uncomfortable, terrifying position of being judged. The very air in the room seems to hum with the palpable shift, as if the scales of justice, long tipped in favor of the powerful, are finally, agonizingly, beginning to right themselves. The clock on the wall, which Judge Caldwell had so often consulted with impatient disdain, now ticks loudly, its every second a further condemnation of his past arrogance and his present predicament. He can feel the silent, scrutinizing gaze of the public gallery, their previous anonymity replaced by a collective, horrified realization that they, too, have been unwitting participants in a system that has failed them. His judicial robes suddenly feel like a suffocating shroud, a symbol not of authority, but of his own impending professional demise. The courtroom, once his sanctuary, has become his prison, and Jamal, the young man he had sought to crush, holds the key. Judge Alistair Caldwell's jowly face, a landscape of his professional ruin, contorts into a grotesque mask of disbelief and terror, the last vestiges of his imperious demeanor evaporating like mist in a scorching sun. His pale, watery blue eyes, once so dismissive, now bulge slightly, fixed on Jamal with a frantic, desperate intensity, as if searching for a hidden script, a way to rewind time to erase the devastating cascade of revelations. The heavy signet ring, a symbol of his entrenched power, feels like a lead weight on his suddenly numb finger, and his hand, still hovering uselessly above the ebony gavel, trembles so violently it begins to spasm. A low, guttural sound, halfway between a gasp and a whimper, escapes his parched lips, a pathetic echo in the profound silence of courtroom 3B. The air, once thick with his condescension, now crackles with an almost unbearable tension, a palpable sense of impending collapse. He feels a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, a constriction that steals his breath, leaving him gasping for air, his face mottled with a terrifying blend of shame and physical distress. His meticulously coiffed silver hair, which had remained perfectly in place through decades of courtroom drama, now seems to stand on end, each strand a silent scream of his internal chaos. His mind, a fortress of self-importance and ingrained bias, is under siege, bombarded by the precise, undeniable facts Jamal has laid bare. Breaches of judicial conduct, 14th Amendment due process, public utility easement, toxic chemical waste. Each phrase is a hammer blow, shattering the stained glass illusion of his unassailable authority. He sees with horrifying clarity the headlines, the ethics committees, the disbarment proceedings, the public ignominy, his comfortable retirement, his carefully cultivated social standing, his very identity as Judge Caldwell. All of it dissolves into a terrifying void. He thinks of the powerful individuals he has protected, the corporate interests he has served, the quiet favors he has accepted. They will abandon him. He knows this with a chilling certainty. He looks at Jamal, no longer seeing a young man, but a relentless, implacable force, an avenging angel of truth. The quiet intelligence in Jamal's dark eyes, once so easily dismissed as insolence, now burns with a cold, righteous fire that seems to consume Caldwell's very essence, reflecting back to him the full, ugly truth of his own corruption and willful negligence. Ms. Chen, sitting beside Jamal, watches the judge's disintegration with a mixture of profound shock and a burgeoning sense of triumph. Her initial terror has given way to an almost disbelieving awe. She had known Jamal was intelligent, meticulous, but she had not, could not, have anticipated this level of strategic brilliance, this audacious, perfectly executed dismantling of an entire corrupt system. Her hand, which had reached out to restrain him earlier, now rests gently on his arm, a gesture of silent solidarity and profound respect. The young clerk, Ms. Davies, below the bench, has stopped typing entirely, her fingers frozen above the keyboard. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and fascination, dart between the crumbling judge and the impossibly composed young man. She has witnessed countless trials, but never anything like this. Never such a complete and utter reversal of power orchestrated by the supposed victim. The few members of the public gallery, initially apathetic, now lean forward, their faces a tableau of stunned realization, their collective gaze shifting between the judge, whose authority has visibly collapsed, and Jamal, who stands as a beacon of unexpected justice. A low murmur begins to ripple through the gallery, quiet at first, then, growing, an electric hum of dawning understanding. Jamal, however, remains unaffected by the burgeoning chaos he has unleashed. His stillness is absolute, his composure unwavering. He does not gloat, does not smirk. His mission is not personal vengeance, but systemic correction. He allows the silence to stretch, allowing the full weight of his revelations to settle, to suffocate the judge in his own hubris. Then his dark eyes, holding Judge Caldwell's terrified gaze, flick downwards for a final, decisive moment to the simple, utilitarian digital timepiece peeking from beneath his hoodie cuff. This time, the faint pulse of light emanating from its dark face is not a mere flicker. It is a steady, almost imperceptible glow, a signal, a silent declaration of completion. His slender finger, with a precise, almost imperceptible movement, presses a small, recessed button on the device. "Your Honor," Jamal states, his voice still calm, still clear, but now imbued with a quiet, undeniable authority that fills the courtroom, eclipsing the judge's whimpers. "My presence here was not merely an act of civil investigation. It was a deliberate, calculated exposure. I am not merely a young man accused of trespass. I am Jamal Thompson, a legal research analyst and environmental data specialist, operating under a provisional fellowship with the nascent Justice Collective initiative." He pauses, allowing the name to resonate, a name unfamiliar to Caldwell, but one that carries a quiet, revolutionary weight. "My trespass was a premeditated, necessary step in a long-term investigative project designed to expose systemic environmental crimes and the judicial complicity that allows them to persist." He then reveals the full extent of his meticulous preparation, his voice gaining a cold, almost detached precision. "The digital timepiece on my wrist, Your Honor, is a custom-built, secure data streaming device. Every word spoken in this courtroom since the commencement of my case, every one of Your Honor's dismissive remarks, every instance of procedural error, every specific detail of Omnicorp's environmental violations, and indeed, every second of Your Honor's current distress has been live-streamed and securely archived to a dedicated server monitored by the Judicial Conduct Commission, the Environmental Protection Agency's Special Investigations Unit, and a consortium of federal prosecutors from the Department of Justice." The words land like a catastrophic implosion. Judge Caldwell's eyes roll back slightly, his face contorting in a silent scream of pure, unadulterated horror. Live-streamed, archived, Department of Justice. The sheer audacity, the meticulous planning, the complete and utter entrapment. It is too much. He tries to speak, to protest, to deny, but only a strangled, pathetic gurgle escapes his throat. He clutches at his chest with his left hand, his face a ghastly shade of gray, his body swaying precariously in the high-backed leather chair. The heavy judicial robes, once symbols of his power, now seem to weigh him down, a suffocating shroud. He attempts to lift the gavel, to bang it one last time, to assert some semblance of control, but his hand is too weak, too tremulous. The ebony gavel clatters from his grasp, falling with a dull thud onto the polished wood of the bench, then rolls ignominiously to the floor, coming to rest near his polished but now scuffed judicial shoes. It is a sound of absolute surrender, a final definitive declaration of his power's demise. Just as the gavel hits the floor, the heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B, previously sealed, burst open with a sudden, decisive swing. A wave of light from the corridor floods into the somber chamber, momentarily blinding. 4 figures, stern-faced and impeccably dressed, stride purposefully into the courtroom. At their head is a tall, imposing woman with an air of unyielding authority, her sharp gaze sweeping the room, settling instantly on the rapidly deteriorating Judge Caldwell. She wears a dark, tailored suit, and a small, discreet pin on her lapel identifies her as the chief investigator for the state's Judicial Conduct Commission. Behind her are 2 men in dark suits, one with the unmistakable bearing of a federal agent, the other carrying a tablet and wearing the insignia of the EPA's legal division. A 4th, younger woman, also in a suit, carries a secure briefcase. Their entrance is not a request, but a takeover. The chief investigator, her voice crisp and authoritative, cuts through the lingering silence, addressing Judge Caldwell directly, her tone devoid of any sympathy. "Judge Caldwell," she states, her words echoing with chilling finality, "this commission has been monitoring your proceedings for the past several minutes. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented by Mr. Thompson and the clear, irrefutable violations of judicial conduct, due process, and indeed the very spirit of the law, I am here to inform you that you are hereby suspended from the bench, effective immediately. Your judicial authority is revoked, pending a full, expedited investigation into your actions, your past rulings, and your potential complicity in the alleged corporate malfeasance of Omnicorp Data Solutions." Judge Caldwell's eyes, wide with horror, fix on the chief investigator, then dart to Jamal, a silent, desperate plea in their depths. He tries to protest, but his voice is nothing more than a choked wheeze. He attempts to stand, to reclaim his dignity, but his legs buckle beneath him. The federal agent and the EPA legal representative step forward, flanking the chief investigator. The EPA official speaks, his voice grave. "Judge Caldwell, the allegations regarding Omnicorp Data Solutions' environmental violations and the suppression of public health data are of the gravest concern. A federal investigation into Omnicorp and any parties connected to their alleged illicit activities, including judicial figures, commences immediately." His words are a direct, undeniable threat. The chief investigator gestures subtly to the younger woman with the briefcase, who steps forward. "Your chambers are now sealed, Judge. Your personal effects will be cataloged and returned to you at a later date. Any attempt to access court records or interfere with this investigation will result in immediate criminal charges." 2 court security officers who had previously stood passively by the doors now move towards the judge's bench. They approach Caldwell, not with aggression, but with a quiet, professional firmness. Judge Caldwell, utterly defeated, offers no resistance. His large frame, once so imposing, now seems to sag, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. He is no longer the imperious figure. He is a broken man, stripped bare of his power and his pretense. He allows himself to be gently, but firmly, guided from the high-backed leather chair, his judicial robes dragging on the polished marble floor. His gaze, vacant and unfocused, sweeps across the courtroom one last time, a ghost of his former self. He avoids Jamal's eyes, unable to bear the silent, knowing triumph reflected there. He is escorted out through the now open doors, disappearing into the brighter light of the corridor. His departure, marking the symbolic end of his reign. The dull thud of the gavel, still lying on the floor beneath the empty bench, serves as a stark, silent epitaph. To his career, the courtroom breathes again, a collective sigh of relief and stunned awe. The oppressive atmosphere lifts, replaced by a charged silence, pregnant with possibility. The chief investigator turns to Jamal, her stern expression softening, a flicker of profound respect entering her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she states, her voice clear and resonant, "your case for aggravated trespass is hereby dismissed, with prejudice. There will be no fine, no suspended sentence, Furthermore, the information you have brought to light is invaluable. You have performed an extraordinary public service, Mr. Thompson. The Justice Collective has indeed found a truly remarkable fellow in you. She extends a hand towards him, a gesture of formal acknowledgement and profound gratitude. Jamal, his dark eyes still holding that quiet, unshakable confidence, meets her gaze. He does not outwardly react with exuberance or pride. His mission, while achieved in this immediate moment, is far from over. He knows this is merely the first tremor in a much larger earthquake. He thinks of his community, of the polluted wetlands, of the families who have suffered in silence. His composure is not a lack of emotion, but the disciplined focus of a strategist who has just won a critical battle, but knows the war for justice is long and arduous. He looks around the courtroom, at Ms. Chen, whose face radiates pride and admiration, at the stunned faces in the gallery, at the empty, silent judge's bench, where the gavel lies abandoned. The scales of justice, long tipped by power and prejudice, have, through his quiet, meticulous brilliance, finally begun their agonizing, necessary shift. The air in courtroom 3B, once a mausoleum of injustice, now hums with the vibrant, undeniable promise of a new dawn. Jamal Thompson, the young man once dismissed as insignificant, now stands at the precipice of a future he has, against all odds, begun to forge. The chief investigator's outstretched hand, a gesture of formal acknowledgement and profound gratitude, hovers between her and Jamal, a silent invitation that transcends the rigid protocols of the courtroom. Jamal's dark eyes, still holding that quiet, unshakable confidence, meet her gaze, a flicker of something akin to a shared understanding passing between them. He extends his own hand, his grip firm and steady, a stark contrast to the trembling, defeated hand of Judge Caldwell just moments before. The chief investigator's expression, previously stern and unyielding, softens further, a genuine admiration radiating from her as she speaks again, her voice clear and resonant, carrying through the stunned silence. She reiterates the dismissal of his case, with prejudice, emphasizing that the court now formally recognizes his actions not as a crime, but as a public service of unparalleled significance. She acknowledges the invaluable nature of the information he has unearthed, the profound impact it will have, and she affirms his affiliation with the Justice Collective, validating his purpose and his identity in this new, unexpected light. Jamal does not outwardly react with exuberance or pride. His slender frame, which had seemed so fragile upon his entrance, now stands tall, radiating an aura of quiet strength and profound purpose. His composure is not a lack of emotion, but the disciplined focus of a strategist who has just won a critical battle, yet knows the war for justice is long and arduous. His mind, already processing the immediate victory, simultaneously shifts to the next phase, calculating the immense work that lies ahead. He thinks of his community, of the polluted wetlands, of the families who have suffered in silence for far too long, their illnesses dismissed, their pleas ignored. This dismissal, this vindication is not merely for him, it is for them, a beacon of hope in a landscape of despair. He feels the collective gaze of the public gallery, their previous apathy replaced by a palpable sense of awe and dawning hope. A low, reverent murmur, a mix of relief and nascent applause begins to ripple through the room, a spontaneous, heartfelt acknowledgement of the seismic shift they have just witnessed. Ms. Chen, her face radiating a profound mixture of pride, relief, and sheer, unadulterated admiration, approaches Jamal, her eyes wet with unshed tears. She places a hand gently on his shoulder, a silent testament to her respect for his audacious brilliance. She whispers, words of profound congratulations, expressing her astonishment at his meticulous preparation and his unwavering courage, acknowledging that he has taught her more about true justice in a single hour than years of legal textbooks ever could. She knows, with absolute certainty, that her own career has been irrevocably altered by this day, not just professionally, but ethically. She feels a renewed sense of purpose, a burning desire to champion the vulnerable, to challenge the powerful, a fire, rekindled by Jamal's quiet resolve. The courtroom itself seems to breathe again, the oppressive atmosphere lifting, replaced by a charged silence, pregnant with possibility. The cold, sterile luminescence of the recessed LED panels now seems less harsh, almost softer, reflecting off the polished marble floor in patterns that no longer feel dizzying, but rather expansive, full of light. The scent of aged paper and polished wood remains, but the faint metallic tang of decay has vanished, replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible scent of fresh air, of change. The heavy oak doors, which had once sealed off the chamber like a tomb, now stand ajar, inviting in the muffled sounds of the courthouse corridors, a reminder that the world outside is ready to embrace the reverberations of this momentous event. The dull thud of the gavel, still lying on the floor beneath the empty judge's bench, serves as a stark, silent epitaph to Judge Caldwell's reign, a symbol of his absolute surrender, a relic of a broken system. Meanwhile, Judge Alistair Caldwell's descent into disgrace is swift and merciless, a public spectacle meticulously orchestrated by the very system he once commanded. Escorted from courtroom 3B, his once imposing frame now slumped and defeated, he is immediately taken into custody. The federal agents, with the EPA's legal division representatives, begin their initial questioning in a sterile, windowless room deep within the courthouse, their voices calm but relentless, peeling back layers of his arrogance and willful ignorance. He attempts to deny, to deflect, to reassert his authority, but his words are hollow, his threats impotent. The live-streamed recording, complete with Jamal's precise citations and Caldwell's escalating distress, becomes irrefutable evidence, played and replayed for the Judicial Conduct Commission and federal prosecutors. Within hours, news channels flash breaking reports, their headlines screaming of a corrupt judge, exposed, environmental cover-up unveiled, and youthful whistleblower brings down judicial tyrant. The meticulously coiffed silver hair, the jowly face, the imperious demeanor, images of Judge Caldwell, once symbols of unassailable authority, are now plastered across every screen, his public humiliation complete. Social media erupts, a furious torrent of outrage and vindication, as countless individuals share their own stories of Caldwell's harshness, his dismissiveness, his prejudiced rulings. The carefully cultivated reputation, built over decades, shatters into a million pieces. The Judicial Conduct Commission, spurred by the undeniable evidence and immense public pressure, moves with unprecedented speed. A formal, expedited investigation is launched within 24 hours, delving into Judge Caldwell's entire career, scrutinizing his past rulings, his financial disclosures, and his connections to Omnicorp Data Solutions. Whistleblowers, emboldened by Jamal's courage, step forward with their own testimonies of Caldwell's biased conduct and his subtle, yet consistent favoring of corporate interests over public welfare. Within a week, the commission formally disbars him, stripping him of his license to practice law, revoking his pension, and ordering him to vacate his judicial chambers permanently. The symbolic act of removing his name from the state bar rolls marks the formal end of his legal career, a humiliating public repudiation. The federal investigation into Omnicorp Data Solutions accelerates with explosive force. Raids are conducted on their corporate offices, their data centers, and the homes of their senior executives. Mountains of incriminating documents, digital records, and internal communications, much of it corroborating Jamal's meticulous research, are seized. The bioreactor technology, revealed as a thinly veiled front for illegal toxic waste disposal, becomes the centerpiece of a massive federal indictment. Executives are arrested, charged with environmental crimes, corporate fraud, and endangerment of public health. Omnicorp's assets are frozen, their stock plummets, and the company, once a titan of industry, faces a barrage of class action lawsuits from affected communities, government agencies, and environmental advocacy groups. Its downfall is swift and spectacular, a cautionary tale of corporate greed and environmental negligence. The long-term impact of Jamal's actions ripples outwards, transforming not just his community, but sparking significant systemic changes across the state and, eventually, the nation. In his own neighborhood, The immediate aftermath brings a wave of relief and hope. The polluted wetlands bordering the public housing complex become the focus of a massive environmental remediation project, funded by the seized assets of Omnicorp and augmented by federal grants. Specialized teams work tirelessly to clean the contaminated soil and water, installing advanced filtration systems and monitoring stations. Health clinics are established, offering free screenings and treatment for the respiratory illnesses and skin conditions that had plagued the community for years, with long-term studies initiated to track the health improvements. Families displaced by the pollution are offered compensation and assistance, and community leaders work with environmental agencies to establish permanent safeguards against future corporate abuses. The once struggling public housing complex, previously overlooked, becomes a symbol of resilience and revitalization, a testament to the power of collective action. On a broader scale, Jamal's case becomes a powerful catalyst for legal and judicial reform. State legislatures, embarrassed by the exposure of systemic judicial misconduct and regulatory oversight failures, enact new, more stringent environmental protection laws, increasing penalties for corporate polluters and empowering regulatory agencies with greater enforcement capabilities. Whistleblower protection laws are strengthened, offering greater legal and financial safeguards to individuals who expose corporate and governmental malfeasance, encouraging more people to come forward without fear of reprisal. A comprehensive review of all public utility easements and land deeds across the state is initiated, uncovering and rectifying numerous instances of illegal corporate encroachment on public lands, ensuring that public access and environmental integrity are protected. The Judicial Conduct Commission, facing intense public scrutiny, undergoes its own internal reforms. Mandatory retraining programs for judges are implemented, focusing on due process, implicit bias, and the ethical responsibilities of the bench. Clearer guidelines are established for the handling of evidence, particularly in cases involving public interest, and greater transparency is introduced into judicial proceedings, making it harder for judges to dismiss crucial information or act with unchecked authority. The Justice Collective Initiative, once a nascent, underfunded venture, experiences a surge of public support and philanthropic funding. It attracts brilliant young legal minds, environmental scientists, and investigative journalists, becoming a formidable force for social justice, launching new investigations into similar cases of corporate malfeasance and systemic corruption across the country. Jamal Thompson, now a quiet, respected figure within the collective, continues his meticulous research, his digital timepiece a silent, ever-present tool in his ongoing quest for truth and accountability. He becomes a mentor to aspiring activists, a living embodiment of the power of knowledge and perseverance. The story of Jamal Thompson reverberates far beyond the confines of Courtroom 3B, becoming an enduring testament to the profound truth that justice, though often slow and arduous, is ultimately attainable. It stands as an inspirational message that challenges the deeply ingrained belief in the invincibility of power and prejudice. It affirms that even against seemingly insurmountable odds, the quiet courage of an individual, armed with knowledge and an unyielding commitment to truth, possesses the transformative power to dismantle entrenched systems of abuse and inequality. It underscores the vital importance of standing up to injustice, of questioning authority, and of demanding accountability from those who wield power. The scales of justice, long tipped by wealth and influence, have, through Jamal's quiet, meticulous brilliance, finally begun their agonizing, necessary shift, seeking a true equilibrium. The air in Courtroom 3B, once a mausoleum of injustice, now hums with the vibrant, undeniable promise of a new dawn, a future where the pursuit of equality and the unwavering fight for human dignity illuminate the path forward, ensuring that the voices of the vulnerable are heard and that true justice, however delayed, is never ultimately denied. Jamal Thompson, the young man once dismissed as insignificant, now stands at the precipice of a future he has, against all odds, begun to forge, leading by example, a quiet force for profound, lasting change.